So welcome back to another one of my review videos. This will be the fourth installment of my budget scope review series. In this case, we're going to be looking at the Bushnell Legend 3 to 9 by 40. But before we take a closer look at the scope, we're going to go over a couple of the general specs. First one being the length, which is 12.4 inches. Our weight is going to be 14.6 ounces. Tube diameter is going to be 1 inch. The eye relief off the back is going to be 3.5 inches. Our field of view at the 3x power is going to be 37.5 feet at 100 yards. And at the 9x, we're going to be at 12.2 feet at 100 yards. Our turrets are going to be in quarter MOA per click adjustments. Our total travel per rotation is going to be 15 MOA. And then our maximum travel for the elevation and the windage is going to be 60 MOA each. The scope is set with a 100-yard fixed parallax, and it is a second focal plane scope. So those are the basic details. So let's go ahead and get a closer look at it. It did come with these set of transparent two-tone lens covers. I believe those are the factory ones, but that is all that I received with this when I ordered it off eBay. It is used. And so it is what it is. I don't have the books or the manuals or any of the other stuff that would normally come with it in the box. I don't even have the box. But we're going to start here at the rear, where our eyepiece is, our adjustable eyepiece. There's just a little bit of bumpiness. It feels like little bumps as you're going through the middle of that adjustment range. Then when you get out here to the end, they seem to go away for the most part. We'll go ahead and get that all the way out and then turn it in a little past a quarter. And there is a little bit of play. It's not aggressive, but you can feel it, or I can feel it. Down here where it's more of like a reasonable extension for you might use it for your actual eyesight. Now I really don't hardly feel anything at all. So I would say that that is acceptable, if not ideal. All right. On that eyepiece, we do have this round rubber ring to help you if you were on a gun with a little more recoil. If it does end up butting you in the eye, it will hopefully not cut you. It might just embarrass you a little bit, give you a little bit of a bruise, but it should help prevent any bleeding out there at the range or in the woods if you forget that your gun recoils and kiss yourself in the face with it. Anyway, that is the eyepiece. You can hear that. Just a little bit of resistance in there where things are rubbing on each other. All right, so we're going to move forward to our magnification ring, which I have it set at 3, which is at the 9 o'clock position. Go ahead and crank that around. That puppy is tight like that. I have to definitely get a grip on that thing. It's a good thing that there is that little stud there, because that would be a challenge. That would be unpleasant if that was not the case, because there's not really any real texture or grip on those ridges right there. But anyway, the 9 o'clock is right over at this 3 o'clock position, or the 9 power is at the 3 o'clock position. So we have 180 degrees of throw from minimum to maximum. And then this also, like how there was a little bit of bumpiness in our eyepiece, I feel the same thing in the magnification ring. So I'm not sure if it has something to do with their O-rings that they're using. There is an unusual feeling of just like there's little bumps that it goes over as I rotate it. You can hear that over my freezer in the background gurgling. Yeah, there's definitely some resistance in there, some mechanical resistance, not just the O-rings that are used to damp it. It's definitely rubbing on itself in there somewhere. But the benefit of all that tightness is that there's very, very little play in that ring. Just a tiny little bit. So hopefully that thing will prove to be durable over time and not wear in and get loose. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and move forward and look at the finish. And this one has a more satin flat finish. It's not particularly reflective, though there is a slight difference between this finish and this finish. This one looks a little bit darker, a little more like black, whereas this one is just a little bit more gray up here. And you can see the transition if you look here and here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera, but I can see it with my naked eye. Just this is a little gray and that is more black. It's similar with these caps. They are just not quite the same color anodization. That's probably just two pieces being made by different manufacturers and then assembled at the factory. We can see that it's made in China. And overall, except for where the scope rings that I put on this thing so I could shoot it, or shoot with it, the rings did leave a little bit of a mark on there, which was these guys. There'll be a review for those. Well, by the time you see this video, that review should already be out. But anyway, so those rings did leave a bit of a mark on the finish, even though I don't recall there being any tightness to the rings when I was setting it up prior to torquing it, obviously. But the finish is good. It's even if it is not the same all the way across. There's no thinness to it. It looks pretty good. So we'll take a quick look at these caps. And on the inside of this one, you can see where the brass from the erector has rubbed off onto the anodizing of the threads. And the same is true here. Some of the black from the anodizing has transferred to the threads. And this is a non-removable turret cap, or turret, no re-zeroing that one. It sounds pretty good, just for initial impression. It is very slippery. There's no texture on there though, so I'm not a huge fan of that. I wish there was a little bit of knurling. I always like that whenever I have to adjust things with gloves on, or if my fingers get cold and numb. I prefer there be something that gives you a little better grip. But I will not be taking that apart. I assume that if I do, bits and pieces will probably come flying out at me. And then we get that back on there, and there is a generous gasket down here at the bottom to seal it and keep things like dust and water out. And then on our elevation turret, we have our logo. And then we see a very similar style turret. A little bit less of that transfer, and that may just be that the person who owned this before me took this cover off less, and so there was just less opportunities for it to rub against itself. But we do see some of the anodization on those threads and a little bit of that brass inside the cap. That one sounds pretty good. And it is marked for rotation to the right and indicates our quarter MOA per click at 100 yards. Both of these turrets we're going to get a much closer look at when I get it mounted up in my fixture and take a very detailed inspection of those. Get that turned back on. And then finally we'll come up here and look at our front objective. There are no threads for a sunshade. There's just our retaining ring that holds in the front lens. And then the last thing I want to do is confirm the manufacturer's stated weight. They're saying 14.6. The scale is going to say 14.3. So just a hair lighter than advertised. And with the caps, we're right at 15 ounces. All right, I think we're good to go, and we can move on to looking at the reticle inside of here and the turrets in more detail. So I have a setup here to look at the reticle in our Bushnell Legend. Bushnell refers to this reticle as the DOA Quick Ballistic Reticle. You can see that we have kind of a lot going on here with our drops, so I'm going to just jump right into it. On the center part of the stadia, we have a crosshair, relatively simple duplex type setup, where the thin lines are going to be a 0.25 MOA, and the thick line that go out there towards the edge of our field of view are going to be 0.75 MOA, so almost a single MOA in thickness on that heavy section of the lines. And then as we see on the 6 o'clock stadia, we have some BDC holds. The center of each one of those holds is essentially a dot that is 1 MOA in diameter. And then each dot has a crosshair type hash going through it. And I'm just going to go from the top. We have 1.4 MOA of drop and a 1.5 MOA wide hash. And in that one, it almost looks kind of like diamond shaped just because the hash mark doesn't distinguish itself from the dot particularly well. But that's just what we have. On the next dot down, the second dot, we have 3.4 MOA of drop and a 2 MOA wide hash. On the third one, we're looking at 6.2 MOA of drop and a 2.2 MOA wide hash mark. And on the fourth one, we have 9.6 MOA of drop and a 4 MOA wide hash. They're not really wide enough to give you a tremendous amount of wind correction. I'm not sure what value they have other than just differentiating each other from one another so they're easy to remember which one you're looking at. Aside from that, they're just basically a BDC dot system. And then on the 6 o'clock stadia, where the thin line steps up to the heavy line of the stadia, that is at 13.7 MOA. So that's what we have going on with that. I am going to run through our magnification. We're currently sitting at 9, and I'm going to go ahead and crank it back down to 3. And we will see that there is just a little bit change in brightness. Go back up from 3. You see just that little bit of shadow creeps in at the edge. It's not significant. There is just the slightest little bit there. Nothing to worry about. What we do see on this, and what we're going to see throughout the rest of this, because I've already shot some of the other video, is this enormous black bezel that goes around there on our, around our field of view. I don't know what to tell you about that. That thing just takes up a bunch of real estate. It is what it is. It doesn't matter where you have your eye set as far as your eye relief, which on this scope is set at 3.5 inches, as I previously stated. You're just going to have a whole bunch of black ring taking up some of your field of view. Yeah, I don't know. That's about all I have to say about this thing. We've got our BDC reticle. We have a fairly consistent eye relief. We're not seeing any tunneling or shadowing to worry about. And we will go ahead and reposition, take a look at our turrets before we go outside and start looking through this. I have adjusted our position so that we can take a look at this elevation turret. I have the cap off already just because it was kind of noisy and gritty. I'll show you that when I put it back on. You can see there where the anodization has started to wear off. That is a little bit of brass from underneath this nickel plating that they put on the threads. So you can tell that they are not the smoothest in the world. It is metal, however. Both the cap and the dial are made out of aluminum, so that's good. What is not good, and I'll tell you up front, is that this is not a zero resettable turret. It is marked up here for our counterclockwise up movement, and it does have our 1/4 MOA per click at 100 yards. But I'm gonna go ahead and be quiet and give this a little turn so you all can see and hear what it sounds like. There you go. It has a bit of a weird sensation to it because when you're going in the counterclockwise direction, you have a decent little tactile feel. It's not amazing, but you can hear it clearly. And then when you go the other way, it gets very quiet and much more mushy, and it just sort of rolls out of the detent as opposed to like clicking out of the detent. So That's interesting how there's that much difference in the sound and feel from one direction to the other. The other thing I don't like about these turrets is that there is nothing telling you where your alignment is. There's no hash, there's no dot. You're just left to guess. So if you were sitting behind this thing and you were right there, where are you at? Are you at a quarter MOA? Are you at a half an MOA? Are you at 3/4 of an MOA? You have no idea because it's just sort of vague. We do see that we have 14 here, so that's going to be 15 MOA per rotation. So at least you have some idea of how far you've gone if you're paying attention. But there's also no revolution counter to let you know which revolution you're on. It's a very basic turret. There's no knurling, so wet fingers, cold fingers, fingers with gloves. You're gonna have to really get a good grip on that. There's enough there to get a hold of, but you know, it'd be nice if there was some knurling just so you could have a little more finesse. But that is not the case. I don't know that there's anything else to say about this turret, and we will go ahead and get repositioned to look at the elevation turret, which I can tell you is more or less the same. So about this cap, you need to be careful getting that on there. You hear that little click? You definitely want to go backwards until you hear it drop into that thread, because the sidewalls of this thing are very thin and they're kind of, you can squeeze it with your fingers and feel a little bit of give, and you don't want to get that cross threaded because it's not strong enough to kind of resist bending and hopping that thread. You might be able to hear that. That's worn itself in a little bit. It was a little bit more gritty when I first got it, but I've had this thing on and off here about 10 or so times now, and it's, you can see that wear that I showed you in there where the threads and the anodizing have rubbed each other bare. And then you get down there at the bottom, there is a gasket to keep out the elements, so that's a good thing. That's all I'm going to say about that turret. We'll go ahead and look at the windage turret. I have a setup now to take a look at this windage turret. Get the cap pulled off real quick, and then we will see our dial. Just as a note, this cap and this bit of the dial are both made out of aluminum. We do see that it's marked for left and right rotation, and on the top up here it says that the counterclockwise is going to be right, and it also gives us a 1/4 MOA per click note up here as well. But this cap is not removable, not resettable for 0, so I can't pop that off there and kind of show it to you in more detail. I will go ahead and give this a little spin so you can hear what it sounds like and see what kind of play it has. And there you have it. One thing I do notice is that this is completely smooth, and if you had cold fingers or wet fingers, you could easily just slide on this thing as opposed to making rotational adjustments. So that's one thing I would like to see different, is if that had some knurling on it, but there's really not space for it on the way that it's designed. And then the other thing I noticed is that there is no indication for where your 0 is. So the fact that they do left and right rotation sort of pointless, because there's nothing to reference when you're making those adjustments. Like, where are you? You at 2.25 or 2.5? You know, it's just, there's nothing to reference. So I assume that that is approximately where my 0 is, but now I'll have to go back and check it, because it could easily be 1 or 2 clicks off and you would have no real way of knowing. That being said, I think we've had enough of a look at this turret, and we will go ahead and move on outside and take a look through the scope and see what it does. So I've got us out here now, ready to look through this Bushnell scope. And we're going to start at 50 yards and 3x magnification, and we're going to look at the side of my SUV and my fun little art chart with the surprise chicken and a nice color scale. And the first thing we notice across our field of view is that out there towards the last 20% or so on either side, we are seeing a considerable softness of that field of view. And I made a good faith effort when setting this thing up to try to minimize that, and that is about the best that I could manage. With the naked eye, you are going to see essentially the same thing. It may vary a little bit depending on your vision, but you're not going to get away from that little bit of fisheye and softness out there on the edge. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. Again, we're at 50 yards. Get up there to our 9 power and adjust my brightness just a touch. And what we have before us is a nice sharp reticle, but a soft kind of purplish tinted image of those black letters and the black lines on there. And that is partially as a result of our fixed parallax, which is at 100 yards. And since we're at 50 yards, we cannot have both in focus at the same time because our depth of field does not accommodate that. But what I am going to do is change the focus over to the chart. Try to get that as sharp as possible. About right there. I think that looks good. And then you see that purple kind of tint cleans itself up a little bit as all of the colors of light kind of get stacked back into their proper orientation, and our playing cards become much clearer, as do the individual lines in our bullseyes and bullet holes, and just overall the image gets considerably better. I'm actually pretty happy with that. But the trade-off is how blurry that reticle has become even there at 50 yards, which you can see kind of, if I move it down here just a little bit in the middle of our little circle and diamond. It's not that you couldn't use it. Those heavier stadia lines out there on the 3.6 or the 3, 9, and 12 are definitely going to help you bring your attention to the center, but that has gotten quite blurry already. What I'm going to do is pan a little bit to our right and look at some stuff that's about half that distance, right at about 28 yards. And we're going to see two things. One, how that parallax continues to struggle, or if it changes at all, and the lines of the vertical siding on this wood building. You can see it just there off the edge of the scope's field of view. We're going to see if we see any fisheye. So let me get this freed up. Go ahead and pan over here. Just give this thing a look. And honestly, the fisheye doesn't look terrible. There's a little bit. You can see that that power box is at probably about 40 yards. And as we come down to the face of the building, we do see a little bit of fisheye just out there in the edge. That's kind of what I expected. But we're going to go over here, and we're going to pan up to some white letters right there, which are looking actually pretty good. I don't think I need to adjust that focus. Or don't necessarily need to, but we're going to move it just a little bit, see if we make it any better. I don't know that the adjustment in that focus warrants it based on how fuzzy, maybe about right there. And again, you see how hazy and fuzzy that the lines of our reticle have become as a trade-off for the clarity of the letters down there. Try to get that lined up in there. So if you were trying to shoot small targets at 25 yards with that and you need to be very precise, that could be a bit of a challenge, or you're going to have to do the little dance between focusing on your target and focusing on the reticle as you're trying to line up that shot. I'm going to go ahead and pan back across here with a little higher, with a little more brightness, so that we can get a really good sense of how that fisheye is going to affect us. And the sharpness at this distance is actually a little bit better than it was down there. Or this magnification is a little bit better out there at the edge of the field of view than it was at the 3x. I'm not seeing near as much of that fall off. until, now if you look out there at the distance, now that we've focused here at the shorter, how warped that image is out there at about 150 yards of those trees back there. They are very out of focus. And the fisheye is much more apparent. So this scope is definitely showing a sensitivity towards its focus and its depth of field. We'll be interested to see how it performs when we go in the other direction and exceed parallax significantly. Bring this reticle back into focus. And we see how our image has gone back to being blurry. That's about all we need to look at here at 50 yards. We are going to go ahead and move out to 100 yards and take a look at it at its actual fixed parallax distance and see how it performs. So I have us moved out to the 100-yard line, and we are going to see how this does. We see the same kind of fish-eyeing softness out there towards the edges that we saw at 50 yards. Really anything, that last 25% on either side, definitely seeing a little bit of fisheye rolling off. So that's at the 3 power. We're going to go ahead and zoom in to 9 power. Let's see how it looks here real quick. Get my brightness set. No, that's a little too bright. There we go. And now that we're at 100 yards where the parallax is supposed to be, we're still seeing, outside of maybe the exact center, just a little bit of softness. The edges of those yellow circles, as well as the edges of each one of those color cards, just not tremendously sharp. And I did make an effort to try to get the focus on this thing as close as possible. The reticle looks good, but the edges of just the cardboard, the colors, those cards, just a little bit soft. Same way with the letters. The chromatic aberration and the purple fringing is not terrible, partially because the sun is hiding on us right now again behind some clouds. We're starting to see it maybe starting to peek out on that fender at the top, just above the wheel. We're starting to see some sunlight glaring off of there. Just bring this up out of the way a little bit, get an idea of what our reticle is going to look like. A little bit bigger. I'll pause for a second, let this truck and dust go by. I don't want to be too hard on the scope. It's doing, I think, the best that it can for the price paid. It's not an unusable image, but there is just a sort of softness overall that is not ideal. What I'm going to do now is pan over to our right, and we're going to go across these trees and just get an idea of what this is going to look like with its fixed parallax. Those plants right there, those flowers, the yellow ones, are right at about 135 yards. And that's true all the way across here until we get out here to the road, right there. And then the trees back there above the road are going to be right at 200 yards. And we are seeing sort of the limitation of our depth of field there with our fixed parallax. It's not that you couldn't make out a target at that distance if you were focused on the reticle as we are here, but it is definitely a softer image than I would like to see, especially out there towards those edges. It's really starting to show that lack of performance in the glass that this scope has. Whereas if you look at the grass down there at the bottom, maybe the bottom quarter of the field of view and the rocks, that's a real good example. We have everything where that grass line is, it's going to be right at, let me measure it. So the grass line is at 95 yards and the trees in the back are at 200 yards. And you can definitely see a difference in that sharpness. But with that being said, I think we will go ahead and box this up, move ourselves out to the floodplain, and have a look at some different buildings and things out there. give us an idea how this guy is going to perform out there at longer distances. So now I have us out here in the floodplain to take a look at some more distant targets, and we will start with our area rules and regulation signs at 310 yards. And I have us lined up on it with our second dot, because that is approximately that, or the maybe third dot, somewhere right in that range is where you would need to be holding if you were using the BDC to make your elevation corrections. And I have us out here at 9 power. I'm going to quickly dial back to 3. I was just getting it set up at that magnification. But here at 3 power, we see the same thing we saw there in the parking lot with the eye chart, and that is that the edges of our field of view are pretty soft, but our center is reasonably sharp. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time at that magnification, because at this distance you are almost certainly not going to be using the minimum magnification. So we're going to go ahead and get back up here to 9, and what we see is that the reticle is sharp and the papers down there for the rules and regulations are pretty blurry. We are getting a little bit of chromatic aberration off the top side of those sheets, and just everything out there is out of focus. Where the focus is at is if you see the very tops of those stalks of tan grass, that is at approximately 125 yards, and you can see how much more in focus they are, although they are not perfect either. So what I'm going to do is adjust the focus to favor our regulation signs, and then we're going to see how that affects the crosshair. If I can go the right way. So right about there is going to be our maximum sharpness. And we can see that even the stuff there at 125 yards, those tan grass reeds are a little bit improved. But the stuff beyond our regulation signs, which is at the top of the berm, look at 380 yards, it's improved, but it's still not great. It's still pretty soft. And that is just, I think, going to be an ongoing theme with this scope, which is that it does not have a tremendous depth of field. Those pages down there are obviously distinguishable for their individual sheets. The words are, there might be a couple words on there that you can read in the bigger font, but the overall image is still just a little bit lacking in sharpness. The color representation is actually decent. The greens and the tans are well represented, as is the brown on the little backer over there that doesn't have any papers on it right now. But what we do notice is that the reticle and the drop that you might be using is starting to get a little bit fuzzy, and you're going to have to make that distinction for yourself between if you want to focus on your reticle or your target at that distance. I'm really batting 1,000 out here today with the background noise between cars and helicopters and apparently F-18s. Can't catch a break. But we're going to keep working on this, and we're going to do the best we can. So as I was saying, just that softness of either your reticle or your target is the choice that you're going to have to make. So if you were focused on your reticle nice and sharp, you can see how those pages get a lot blurrier. And that is with good contrast. So if you were more up here in this tree line, looking at some critters, you can see how that blurriness, especially if it was a low contrast sort of deer or something, that could get a little challenging. But what we're going to do now is pivot and go over to our first building. Move a little bit quickly here. Come over here to our first building and settle on our power transformers. They are at 325 yards. The building's at 335 yards. And as before, you're going to have that softness of image where you're just going to have to make that choice about your reticle and your target. So I'm going to favor that target a little bit. Right about there. Get this brightness set where I want it. And once we have the focus out there on our building and our transformers, it is actually a decent image. I mean, barring the edge distortion out there at the edge of our lens, the center is a perfectly usable image. Now, if you were shooting at something as large as that transformer, which is approximately torso size, and using your second drop or your third drop there, you're probably going to be fine. But if you were attempting to shoot at something, say, the size of a beer can, or maybe a groundhog, and you had to use that same hold, now that proposition has become a little bit more challenging, because the drop itself is going to blur a significant amount of that target, and neither one, or only one, can be sharp and in focus at any given time. That being said, we're going to go down here to our brick building, and we're going to see that with the lack of direct sunlight, our chromatic aberration is pretty well under control. I do see a little bit of color fringing on the left side of that silver pipe as it comes down to the ground, but overall it's doing pretty good, and we can make out quite a bit of the detail in those grout lines for the individual bricks, as well as the smaller elements of the framework holding up the building itself. That includes the wires going out to the tower, and the wires going from one tower to the other. And then, as I like to mention, there are two red stickers on that center transformer. They are the number 75, and they are approximately 2 inches tall. So I'm going to go ahead and put our focus back on the reticle, and we will go ahead and move over to our 500-yard building and see how it performs out at that distance. Tilted just a little bit unbalanced. There we go. So now this one, you would be either using that third or that fourth BDC element, or BDC hash mark dot, for that distance. And you can see how, I didn't want to do that. There we go. Get that brightness right. You can see how much of that's going to be covering up as far as the small elements on top or the overall barrel of that transformer. And I am going to go ahead and make the adjustment to bring the focus bias onto our building and our transformer, at which point we have a perfectly usable image, but we have a considerably blurrier reticle. So while we can make out quite a bit of detail on that building, including the finer elements of the antenna on the roof of the building next to the vent, that red vent, and we can make out a pretty good amount of detail in the connection where the wires come out of the building out to our power pole. That reticle has become close to useless, I would say, as far as the BDC elements are concerned. You can tell there's something there, but if you had to, say, use that not on a well-contrasted transformer, but down here on a poorly contrasted, go down here at the bottom where that pole is about deer colored. You know, what part of that are you going to use? So then you'll be required to make that transition back to focusing on our reticle right there. And then if you were a tan colored deer against a tan colored ground or dead grass in the fall, that is going to be a challenge. And that power pole, the brown one there, is only at 340 yards. If it was out there at the distance, say the tops of those grasses out there at the tree line, I would question whether or not you would be able to make that out from a deer from the background, or even anything even smaller than that. But that is, the difference between this and a much more valuable scope, sacrifices have to be made. And while the sun is coming back out, I want to go back to the focus on the building and just see right about there how much detail we can see in those rungs on the steps going down on the right, as well as the framework of the building, and even, you know, the tree line back there in the shades. You can make out quite a few of those trunks. We can make out a good amount of detail in the grass beneath the building and behind the building. It's just you don't have the adequate depth of field to even have both even remotely in focus at the same time. So as we pan back to where we began, I am going to leave it focused on the distance and maybe stop and make small adjustments as we go, because we're going to drop a lot of distance between the 550 yards of that building and the 310 yards of our regulation signs. But I want to see how the fisheye looks when we are biased on the target and not on the reticle. Looking pretty good on that one. Still looking pretty good. That berm out there is at about 450 yards now. And I'm going to pause when we get to the next building and make sure I have the focus dialed in as well as possible. Right here. Yep, I think we're okay. And we will continue to pan. When we're focused on our target, the fisheye is still there. You can see just a tiny little bit of curve in that, but honestly it's not terrible. It straightens out as we go across, and then as we get to the other side it just starts to bend out there towards the extreme edge again. And we come back to where we began. You can see with that focus actually dialed for the 550 yards, that berm behind the sign at about 380, 400 yards actually looks a lot better. But then our sign is not as sharp. So it's just going to be those trade-offs with this scope. I think there's not much we can do about it. Right about there, focus again on our reticle. I think the last thing I want to point out here, if I haven't mentioned it before, which I don't think I have, is the amount of the scope bezel that we see. It's kind of a lot, honestly. I found it distracting when I was using this scope just at the shooting range, about how much of it you see. I'm going to zoom out to no magnification, just to give you a better idea of what that's going to look like. So if you look at even down here at the 3 power, where we get a better field of view. I'm just going to pan this over here. So you lose it there, your targets, if that's what you were looking at. Then you don't see them again until there. There are those little white specks. There, it just came in the side of off the right side of the black circle. So that thing is that bezel is taking up a considerable amount of your natural field of view. And that's something you need to think about when you're looking at scopes, is just how it's actually going to look to your naked eye when you're using it. I don't think that I have much more to say out here, and I will go ahead and get this boxed up and take us on back to the bench and wrap this video up. So we're back here at the bench so I can give you my final thoughts and wrap up this video. I have my notes so that I can stay on track and not get sidetracked or down any rabbit holes. And I will start out with my pros. The first of which is the generally solid construction of this scope. There's nothing that felt loose or like it's gonna break or fall apart. They've done a good job of making a scope that feels sturdy, that you can have some confidence in that it's not going to break the first time that it experiences some recoil. Now, I haven't personally put this on anything with more recoil than a 6.5 Creedmoor, so I can't tell you how it will hold up long term on something like a Magnum rifle or a 30-06 or one of those calibers that has just more recoil in general. My second pro that I'm going to talk here about is the availability. Because this is sold at Walmart, retail, it's under the glass, you can find this thing basically anywhere. So if you are in a location where maybe you don't have a very good local gun store that sells optics, or a big box sporting goods store that sells optics, you are probably going to be able to find this scope. Now, Walmart also has some other Bushnell scopes that I would not recommend that are even cheaper than this one. This is probably as cheap as I would go. The other ones I've looked through just in the store and the feel of them, like the Banner series, just avoid those ones. I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in those things holding up. But this one, I think if you were in a pinch and that's, you needed to get a scope, that you could take this one and you'd be all right. And then my last pro is going to be that reticle, which I have a little diagram here. I think that the size of the 1 MOA dots and the spacing that they've put on those is going to be practical for a bunch of different calibers and give you a good reference for like that 200 or 300 yard shot. Beyond that, as we saw with the glass clarity and the issues with the focus, I don't know that those longer shots are really practical. But inside of 300 yards, I think that reticle does a pretty good job of giving you a good point of aim that is actually applicable to things like 308 and 6.5, 30-06, and even 5.56. So those are my pros. To move on to the cons, my first one is going to be the turrets. It just seems like somebody wasn't really thinking about what a turret is supposed to do when they designed this thing, given that there's no zero indexing point, they're not resettable, they're too smooth, and they just, the only thing they do well is they have a decent little detent, but even that is inconsistent depending on which direction you're rotating it in. So, I don't know, maybe other people would be less picky, but I am just uninspired by those turrets. I was able to get this thing zeroed, but if you needed to make an adjustment for a different load and then try to go back to your original load, you're just basically going to have to re-zero the thing twice, because they give you no way to reference or make a note on how to go from one zero to another, which wouldn't have been a major, wouldn't have taken a lot to include that in that turret. So I don't like the turrets. The glass performance, that's probably my next con. If you were never going to be shooting, hunting past 200 yards, maybe 250 yards, you're going to be okay. If you do like to plink casually at those longer distances, the glass quality in this thing really starts to show its limits once you get past about 300 yards. Doing that dance between focusing on your reticle and then focusing on your target, there's just too much of a disparity in there. It's not going to be fun to do. Your eye is going to get tired having to go back and forth, and I've played those games before, and you just end up with a headache, and it makes the entire experience less enjoyable. My third con that I have against this thing is related to the robustness of the build, but just the fact that they made this focus ring too tight. Without having a larger stud right here to press against with your thumb, or an included throw lever, that thing is it's going to be a pain in your butt if you're out there. And I can only imagine that it's going to get stiffer when it gets cold, to the point where that would be a real challenge if you're down there around that freezing temperatures, where if you're trying to stay in the glass and see something and zoom in on it, there's a real good chance that you're going to move this scope around too much and you're going to lose your point of aim trying to increase that zoom. And then my last criticism of this scope is the fact that I do not believe that it has a lifetime warranty. It may have some form of limited warranty. I don't have the pamphlet or the box where that might have been stated, but on their website it does not state that this thing has a lifetime warranty. So I will assume that it does not. And that's a big negative, because there are other scopes in this price range that clearly have unlimited lifetime warranties that will cover everything up to and including intentional destruction. And those two would be the Crossfire and the 6 Hour, which you're not paying any more and you're getting a warranty that you can depend on. So those are my cons for this Bushnell. And then I'm going to talk briefly about who I think this scope is for, and I would say it is for someone who is on a short time scale and just needs to be able to go into their local Walmart and grab a scope for $100 or $110 and get it zeroed and take it to the woods. If you have more time than that, or if you have better options, like as far as retail locations, this is not the scope that I would recommend. But if you are working under those constraints, this is probably the one that I would suggest as far as what Walmart sells. There are some cheaper ones they sell, Simmons and a Bushnell Banner, that I would just absolutely avoid. Those are rimfire scopes, and I would not put them on anything with any real recoil. And then briefly talk about price. Walmart, it's $107 and change. They'll call it $110 every day of the week if they have it in stock, which they usually do. And then if you were looking to buy one of these used, or if you just stumbled across one, I would probably say $50 to $70 is all that I would spend on this used. That's just my preference. I spent in about that range, plus you throw another $15 to $20 worth of rings at it, and you're going to be under $100 for a package that you can put on your rifle, get zeroed, and be able to go and hunt or plink and expect that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And I think that is going to be the summation of my review of this scope, and I would appreciate any comments or thoughts that you have on this. Just leave them down there in the comment section. And if you want to see more of this sort of content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that notification, and I will see you in the next one. So thank you and have a good day.